what is the story that we're picking back up on, Randall?
Oh, it's the story of stories. It's the story, let's see here. It is Ice Age Floods Institute. I have modified, this is the tagline of the Ice Age Floods Institute, right, which formed pretty much, I think, back in the 90s, because the first time I went on an exploratory expedition in search of knowledge and direct experience of giant flood-created landscapes, I visited the Ice Age Floods Institute in Washington State, in the town of Moses Lake. And it was one office with one little old lady sitting in the back of the local Better Business Bureau of Moses Lake. And I think there was a few chapters at that point, but what was this, 97 or 98? 98. It was 1998. Well, now there's a couple of dozen chapters all over the Pacific Northwest who are very interested, even obsessed with this story, because as it's unfolding, it just gets more interesting, more complicated, more profound. And so I've modified their tagline to say this.
Big is instead of maybe.
It is. Well, one reason it is the greatest story yet untold is because it is so far-reaching in its implications to a lot of other things as well. Let's look at it this way. If we were going to try to come up with an authentic history of the human race on planet Earth, and we completely neglected an event that almost exterminated, almost resulted in the extinction of the human species, that would probably be a critical oversight. Wouldn't you agree?
I would agree.
Yes. And if the recovery from that event or series of events was fundamental to understanding the rise of history itself, then we would even further deem that to be of critical importance and value, wouldn't we?
Yes, we would.
And I think we can make that case that it is, in fact, the fundamental substrate of the whole of the last 10 to 12,000 years of the human experience on Earth. And that the events that went down that are being referred to here, see, and here's the thing, what I think is very symbolical of the constriction of the thinking that has surrounded this particular event. So we'll just dive right into it. All over the North American continent are to be found an assortment of features that are difficult, if not impossible, to explain by reference to modern, currently observable processes, and when they are taken as a whole, implicate the action of events so extraordinary that they almost defy comprehension. It is our judgment that the full mind-bending story of these events has yet to be told, and that when told, it will alter forever our understanding of both the history of the world and of humankind. That's a lot to live up to, but I think the story does live up to that. We will give homage to some of the founding fathers of understanding modern catastrophism, modern diluvialism, after it had been thoroughly discredited, thoroughly denounced by the mainstream of geological study. So this is what he said when this let's see, when did he die? He died in the 80s. He was 96 years old. Ideas without precedent are generally looked upon with disfavor, and men are shocked if their conceptions of an orderly world are challenged. And he was 100% right on there. J. Harlan Bretz. Notice his first name is just the letter J. I'm always getting corrected. You forgot to put the period after J. And then I say, no, it's not an abbreviation. That's his first name, the letter J. Okay? Anyways, J patiently taught us that catastrophic floods may sometimes play a role in nature's unfolding drama. And we saw in this last episode, we went through some evidence for one of those great floods. One of those great floods. And we ended with looking at a site at the border of Idaho and Washington. And at this site, two of the greatest, most spectacular and catastrophic floods in the history of North America met and intermingled. Now, it's going to take some time to sort that out, but that's tremendously significant. Why? Because under current models, the Great Bonneville flood and the Great Missoula flood just happened to be incidentally related because they both occurred sometime at the last ice age, but they both had totally different causes and were unrelated to each other. That is the conventional thinking about these two floods. I, on the other hand, would argue that they are intimately related to each other and that they were even happening concurrently. And if they were happening concurrently, then we're faced with the fact of explaining that away. Well, that's merely a coincidence that they were happening at the same time from independent causes, not that they were happening at the same time because they were both results of the same cause. See?
Yeah, we're having to stack up a lot of coincidence to be able to believe the mainstream narrative.
So if we make that transition, that transcendence from two separate unrelated causes to one greater overriding cause, well, what that then does is it imposes upon us the necessity of expanding our thinking. And I'm going to argue we have to expand our thinking enormously by at least a couple of orders of magnitude. There's the man himself, J. Harlan Bretz, with the University of Chicago, and he was the discoverer of the so-called Missoula flood, this is circa 1923, through his studies of the Channel Scabland of Washington. No, actually, this would have been later. I'm looking at his age here. He's in his 60s, so this was probably in the 50s, late 50s, that he would have been about that age. His name for the event was the Spokane flood, and I'm going to actually propose this. It's usually now known as the Missoula flood, after the town of Missoula in Missoula, Montana. And you'll see some photographs here in a minute of the evidence of the presence of a gigantic volume of water in the Missoula Basin, where the town is now located. I am going to suggest, and if anybody who follows me through this whole chain of logic and evidence that I would be presenting will understand why I think we need to actually change the name of this flood once again to the Cordilleran flood.
Why the Cordilleran flood?
Well, because the Cordilleran is the mountain range, that the Tetons, the Rocky Mountains, all of that is part of the Cordilleran. The Cordilleran concludes the Andes and the Rocky Mountains. So in 1928, J. Harlan said this, the region, and he's talking about this region of Pacific Northwest, specifically Washington, eastern Washington. The region is unique. Let the observer take the wings of the morning to the uttermost parts of the earth. He will nowhere find its likeness. Now, we got to amend that because now we do know other places on the earth where we do find its likeness. Places that were not available to Bretz in 1928. There's a place near the Altai Mountains in where Mongolia and Siberia and China meet. There's an area right in there that has the same scale of flooding as we're about to look at. And the thing about that is we've got a giant flood on the other side of the planet that looks like it's the same scale. It has to be measured in hundreds of millions of cubic feet per second. Now, that is such an extraordinary event and such an extraordinary scale that it's problematic just to explain it once, as far as like explaining it up in Washington State. And if we recognize that over in the Altai Mountains, there's something similar, on the similar scale, the next question is, okay, are they unrelated to each other, or are they related to each other somehow? Well, and the first question you'd have to answer then is you'd have to look at the chronology. You'd have to look at the timing. And what is the timing showing at this point? Well, it's showing that what the dating we have is going to suggest that they're within a very narrow window of happening simultaneously. More dating is going to be necessary because There is some controversies about the dating of the Missoula floods. There's some controversies about dating some of the other floods that have occurred, like, well, the one we talked about in the last episode, the Bonneville flood. Mm-hmm. There's some controversies about the dating of that. We need a solid body of dating evidence that we amass through different formats. And once we do that, then we're going to be able to correlate how closely these events happened in time. And even if they were separated in time, could they have been part of or a result of a manifestation of some larger sequence of events that may be played out over several thousand years? Marjorie Burns, one of the researchers and authors that have spent many years studying this phenomenon in the Pacific Northwest, said that the geological detective tale that developed over the Spokane flood controversy is a tale of such sustained intrigue and epic proportions that its unfolding makes most fictional mystery plots seem trite in comparison. And then geologist Everett C. Olson, back in 1969, when the geological community was finally beginning to accept the reality of these floods, said that the sheer magnitude of the whole Scabland complex and the many ways in which it exceeds the bounds of normal stream erosion and deposition seem to justify, if indeed they do not demand, an outsized agent operating under extraordinary circumstances. Now, what in the world could be that outsized agent? See, this is, to me, the question that has not been answered. This was in 1969, right? And I don't think this question has been answered yet, although I think we're honing in on some answers, but there's a lot of reluctance on the part of the establishment view of this to be willing to go there. And it boils down to this. The establishment view, if I was to characterize it, is pretty much locked into thinking exclusively terrestrial. Exclusively something within the terrasphere, within the planet, not something from outside. Whereas I think we have to be looking at the bigger picture and include cosmic phenomena as well. Mm-hmm. And when we do that, we might be able to actually identify that outsized agent. So, from my writing here, our goals through this presentation will be several. To convey a sense of the unfolding drama of discovery from the 19th century through the 20th and on into the 21st century of this greatest of all floods. To seek after the identity of the ultimate culprit in this drama, the outsized agent operating under extraordinary circumstances, which bears ultimate responsibility for the phenomenon in question, and to propose a radical theory as to the origin of these events of 13,000 years ago, events involving immense flooding whose reality we are only just beginning to comprehend.